Hey everyone, this is Ryan with From Corners Unknown. I hope you're all doing well. Welcome back to our artist interview series, and in this episode, I speak with Nicholas of None. None is a sweltering, albeit meditative amalgamation of neofolk, black metal, dark ambient, harsh noise, and pangs of industrial thrums, sometimes lacerated with harrowing shrieks. Based somewhere in California, None originally was founded as an acoustic duo between Nicholas and a close friend of his. However, as time passed, the dual effort fell through and Nicholas took it upon himself to carry None forward. This project of his contrasts tonally against his other endeavors, some of which include a death metal band named Plague Phalanx, a black metal project named Awakened Abyss, and Thangorodrim. Above all, though, the starkest contrast with None relative to his other endeavors is that he's going at this one alone. Back in October of 2017, Nicholas debuted None to the world with a hypnotic and at times brooding single titled When the End Will Come, which I invite you all to wander through as it will be played after our conversation concludes. Several months later, in May of 2018, Nicholas dropped his debut EP, Infernal Temples of the Meditant. This EP was my personal introduction to Nicholas's work, and when it first struck my ears, I was rather perplexed by the natural coagulation of seemingly disparate genres and tones. A passage of dark ambient led me through a portal toward this looping acoustic neofolk riff, which lulled me into a serene trance as each strum flickered like candlelight in an engulfing blank space. And as the blackened ambience tumefied, stifling the still air, industrial throes cracked and writhed, conjuring malefic tension as the guitar matched its mechanical stride. It left quite the indelible impression on me, and it's a sound I don't think I've really heard elsewhere, so I'm rather ecstatic to share and explore this project with all of you. In the conversation ahead, Nicholas discusses the blend of genres, sounds, feelings, and energy comprising None. He goes into his writing process, what the project represents for him personally, and how he sees it developing in 2019 and beyond. He also divulges the intriguing notion that None is more than just the name of his project, but a deity of his own construction. I don't want to spoil this notion too much, however, as it was a pleasant surprise to learn this during our conversation, so I will leave you all to explore this for yourselves. Just after this introduction of mine concludes, I will play for you folks the latest None single titled Battlefields, and as previously mentioned, when the conversation concludes, I will play for you When the End Will Come. Thank you all for your continued support. If you're enjoying these podcasts, it would be sincerely appreciated if you could subscribe to us on whichever platform you're broadcasting this from, and any feedback or suggestions you have for us is much appreciated as well. As always, thank you so much for tuning into our podcast, and thank you for any and all support you can give Nicholas and None. So None is that your primary project, or do you have other projects in addition to this one that I may not be aware of?
So I started None a few years ago, and it started as a duo with my best friend and I. It was just supposed to be strictly acoustic instrumental music.
Okay.
After writing a couple songs, it kind of just fell off, I suppose, for style difference.
Okay.
And he's still my best friend. He's actually my roommate.
Oh, okay.
But I ended up just kind of taking control of it because I liked where it was going since I started playing acoustic guitar more at that time. Because I probably got heavier into acoustic maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, but I started off as a child playing electric guitar and being into death metal and stuff like that. So I was in a band called Plague Phalanx. I'm not sure if you heard of us.
I don't think so.
I was doing that, and right now I'm also playing live in a cult rock band called Thangorodrim,
Okay.
and then a black metal band called Awakened Abyss.
Oh, wow. Okay, so you do have quite a wealth of projects that you're working on. So how did you go from the project you have now as None? It's just such an interesting amalgamation of sounds. I think when I first stumbled upon it, say a couple months ago, I can't remember exactly when, but just the blend of styles you have on that project, where do each of these come from? Because you have the more acoustic neofolk tones, but you have those industrial drums, and then you even have some harsh noise components melded in there at certain times, and then you have those more dark ambient auras. And it's just such a fascinating amalgamation of sound. I don't know if I've really heard anything else like it before. Maybe I have to do more research. But I'm curious about how you got into producing that sort of a sound, or how you landed on that.
It's hard to say because I am to just kind of sound like myself
Okay.
rather than anyone else. It always starts with the guitar,
Okay.
just writing riffs and trying to emulate some sort of feeling that I've experienced, or really paint a picture of something I've experienced itself, and then everything else, all the other instruments are there to complement the guitar itself.
Okay.
Hence the drums and the noise,
Right.
etc. I definitely listen to a lot of different styles of music. When I first started None, I was really heavy into Blue Das Nord, still am.
Sure.
So I guess there's that, where there's a lot of dissonance going on with Blue. There's a lot of melodic parts too, and industrial. So there's that, and then I also got heavy into Neofolk a few years ago. Like I was telling you, I got heavier into playing acoustic guitar maybe only 5 or 6 years ago, but I got really big into like Death in June and Of the Wand and the Moon, some Rome, and I guess that's where that came from. Just kind of putting together everything that I love about music
Yeah, that's
into
it.
one.
So you would say it's more of a was there a long, arduous thought process as to how to strike the sound you've produced, or did it pour out relatively was it a relatively natural creation of sound? Just because it's like I've said, it's so unique sounding and tension building, and the way you produce the music. I just was curious if there was, I mean, in addition to the influences, if there, like, how you thought about coming to, or like what you did to get to the sound you do produce as None.
It did come pretty natural. Like I was saying, I come up with guitar riffs first, then everything's there to complement it.
Right.
I suppose I kind of felt that I knew what it needed, and it was just about searching for those sounds themselves.
Okay.
Even if I wasn't sure exactly where to start when it comes to the recording process, when it comes to what plugins to use, etc.
Sure.
It was about searching for that exact feeling.
Okay, interesting. So what about the going back some of the earlier stuff? So the transition from, say, doing more electric guitar to acoustic. What compelled you to make that shift, or have that shift in focus, and start doing more acoustic driven compositions or work?
It definitely came over time. I was still playing in Plague Phalanx for a few years as I was starting to write my own music for None, and I suppose it just happened naturally. I still play electric guitar, of course, but I guess I just fell in love with the acoustic guitar.
So going back, even you were doing more, would you say you were more well acquainted with, say, death metal before you got into this genre? I was trying to get some sense of where you transitioned, or what kind of moved you to go from, say, playing in harsher music and then transitioning into something a little more melodic or a little more ethereal, if that makes sense?
Well, I could at least start when I was younger and I was first starting to play guitar. I was really into like neoclassical shredder guitar players, so I already had, an appreciation of that kind of music, and I got into technical death metal when I was 13, 14 or so, mainly because of the guitar stuff.
Right.
And then I went along with that and then played in Plague Phalanx by the time I got into black metal. It just at some point I discovered Of the Wand and the Moon, and I had already listened to a wide range of genres by then. But I definitely loved the simplicity of it and the beauty of it.
Right.
So
going into the project a bit more, what was kind of the origin of the project specifically? Was there a certain moment, so you were working with your friend and it fell off, but you decided to continue forging ahead in a sense and working on this sound? What was compelling you to continue etching away at this project?
I suppose it's the desire to finally have something, to be able to create something that really speaks about, my experiences in my life, things that I wanted to portray. Certain like personal feelings that you don't always get when you're playing with other people, I have to say.
Okay.
It's a completely different experience playing with other people and writing with other people as it is by yourself. It can be a lot harder writing by yourself because it's completely self-motivated, of course.
Yeah.
You don't have anybody else pushing you, or you also don't have to worry about paying for like a rental space for a band to practice.
Sure, that makes plenty of sense.
Yeah, but I suppose I just finally had to have it. I also went the first 10 years of being a musician without playing in any bands or playing live at all. So I suppose it was just about time that I finally had something that spoke about that.
Right. And how would you say, how's it been on the, say, self-motivating aspect relative to playing in bands? Like, how has the dynamic shifted, or do you tend to favor one over the other, doing the more personal on your own sort of project as opposed to working with more people? Or does it, I don't know, because I could imagine working by yourself, you set your own limits, you set your own time frame, but you may not have, if you're playing in a band, you also have folks that are offering up new ideas, and it could change the way a composition sounds, what have you. And I was curious how that dynamic, if you prefer one dynamic over the other, or what you've learned going at this project alone relative to, say, your other more band-focused projects.
It's hard to say. Some groups, some sounds go better when you have ideas bouncing off of one another. I have to say I do prefer working with my own project, at least at this point in time. I have a lot of material actually that I've been sitting on that is just kind of a matter of getting it recorded and then moving forward with it. It's definitely my main focus right now.
Okay.
I have an album that I've been sitting on that I've actually been working on for a couple years already, just trying to get it right. And like I was saying, it's also a matter of getting it recorded. And when you work by yourself, you're completely self-funded. And that makes it a lot more difficult than when you're, you got like 5 people throwing together.
Right.
It's a lot for one person to try to pump out. Let's say, you're spending like $100 to $150 every single time you want to go and record.
Right.
To rent out studio space, and that's easy when you split it 5 ways, $25 each or something. But
yes, exactly.
as one person, and you still gotta pay your rent.
Yes, but you have a full, because I wanted to go a bit, I mean, I want to explore as much as I can on this project, but you also recently, within the last 4-ish weeks, you released Battlefields, and is that a track, so that's your latest track, and that's a pretty hefty, a pretty decent length track as well. Is that one that you plan to make? I believe we had some brief exchange about this, but are you planning to have that part of a full length, an LP of sorts, or is this just a single that will potentially bridge the gap between, now and the time you get the funding and the time to go record all the stuff you're sitting on?
So that's actually something that I've been considering about myself. I could possibly release a new EP pretty soon, and I'm considering putting that on there. But at the same time, I've already released it as the single, and I was going to have it featured on the From Corners Unknown compilation. Right. So I'm pretty set on leaving it as that and using it, like you said, as the bridge between here and the next release.
Okay.
Which will be the full-length album.
On the project on Infernal Temples of the Meditant, I wanted to try to delve some into... I mean, I wasn't able to pick up on too much of the lyrics as far as I was able to continually listen and delve into, but I wanted to see what I could relate or how interested you are in divulging some of the details as to how this project relates to your personal life or what you're channeling, articulating to folks with this sound, because it's pretty unique. And I don't know, I just wanted to try to dig into that as deep as I possibly can, or as much as you're willing to give.
With When the End Will Come, for example, I remember waking up from a drunk night and being somewhat hungover, and I started playing the main riff,
Yeah.
and I just kind of kept that going. I wanted to portray that sense of decay, or that sense of purgatory, if you will, like that stuck sense. And then with the outro, for example, I just remember a lot of things were hitting me at once, emotions, I suppose, and looking back, reflecting on the past, and there was just a feeling of absolute despair. And I didn't have the riff playing in my head or anything. It was just kind of a feeling. And with that outro, I was trying to capture exactly that. As far as lyrics, there are no lyrics on the EP, but there are vocals. Past tense is all vocals, actually.
Right.
So it's, a lot of howling going on. And with past tense, it's just the sense of absolute burning in hell.
Right. Yeah, it's just interesting to hear how you articulate just some of those feelings with the sounds, because it seems like that could fit pretty well within, say, the metal paradigm, but the way you blend in some of those looping acoustic melodies with those really harsh industrial pangs, I don't know, it just creates such a visceral image. I'm trying to think of the right way to go about describing it, because it's so different to my sensibilities. That's what's kind of tripping me up at the moment. So on Infernal Temples, I'm trying to get another sense of, does this album relate to anything specific to you with respect to, say, the absolute despair, just being in hell, what have you? What are those sentiments? I mean, I don't want to make it too personal and try to dig into exactly what was feeding into it per se, because I don't want to make this uncomfortable, what have you. But is there a through line in this EP you're trying to emanate or show folks about yourself personally that they may not be able to glean just from the titles themselves?
I suppose there's not exactly one image, or it's not that I'm necessarily looking for people to understand where I'm coming from or be able to see the exact things that I see in the music, rather than, they would possibly relate. I think there possibly is people who can relate in their own sense. This kind of music, I would go as far as saying, and at least a lot of the music that I listen to, such as like dark ambient and noise, it's all up to the eye of the beholder, to what they take from it and what they see from it. There's not exactly one specific thing that I'm trying to emulate, except for the feeling itself, I suppose. Looking back on a lot of my life, I guess there's a lot of should have, could have type things, as I'm sure we all have. Everybody has regrets in their life, but I'm here now, and I'm at least using that as a weapon, I suppose you could say, to move forward, to make something out of all the bad choices that I have made, all the times I could have done better, I suppose. And use that to create something good out of it.
And what would you say the recording process, with respect to how long it took you to pull, say, just this EP together, was it more of was there some sort of a healing process of sorts when you were writing this, or was this something that, say, you've been mulling over for several years in your head and you were really waiting for the right time to really channel these feelings, if that makes sense?
Now with the EP, it actually came pretty quickly. The first single was When the End Will Come. I released that before I released the full EP. I wrote the riffs and the song on guitar within a couple days, and then I went ahead and I recorded with my roommate, actually, Devin. He's the one who helped engineer this entire project so far.
Oh, okay.
That one came pretty quickly, and I released it as a single. Like I told you, I've been working on this album for a few years already, or a couple years, sorry. And I wanted to use that to at least get off the ground a little bit, so the album can have a pedestal to grow, or at least to be heard.
Sure.
Those are, with the album, I spent a lot of time writing those songs. I spent at least a year's time. Those are the ones that I really want people to be able to hear, and those are the ones that mean the most to me. So I used When the End Will Come as a pedestal for that. And then over a little bit more time, I ended up recording Past Tense.
Right.
And then I wanted to release these on an EP. I thought it would be good to have physical copies and then possibly start coming out with merchandise.
Right.
Maybe some shirts or something pretty soon. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to really just put the 2 singles that I already had on a CD. And so I decided that I would try to go ahead and record a couple more tracks at least, and then I recorded the title track, which is all like industrial noise stuff.
Yes.
So I went ahead and did that, and this whole thing came together within 6 months, I think, of recording.
Okay. So about the process of writing, recording this, so maybe going a bit into, say, the recording or maybe the writing process. As you said, starting more with the acoustic riffing and then building the layers upon that. So when you go, like, what was the process, say, for When the End Will Come? So that is the behemoth, just shy of 17-minute track. When you wrote that track, and maybe say some of the other ones, we can go into those in a bit. So you start with the riff, but how do you move through the production of all the other components that feed into, the rest of the track, say the noise or the dark ambient auras, the atmosphere? How do you go about piecing that track together? Specifically, maybe the end will come. I think that would at least make it a little more concrete, but if it makes sense to talk about it more generally, I don't know. Since it's such a unique sound, I was trying to get some idea of how you pulled it all together, or pull these sounds together.
Well, reverb is a must.
Yes.
That's the number one.
Right.
Just a couple kilos of reverb.
Right.
So they're starting with the acoustic guitar, of course, and I suppose I start with the other instruments rather than the ambience. I'm thinking of When the End Will Come, at least, because it's been a little while since since I started recording that. Actually, it's probably been about a year and a half, so I'm trying to remember. I know I started off with the acoustic guitar, and then I started working on the reverb to at least give it that atmosphere. And I believe the next instrument I started on drums. I knew what kind of style I wanted to go for. It was just about piecing it together. Once I did that, I believe I added the electric guitar and the harsher noise. It goes by instrument from instrument.
Okay.
Rather than like back and forth.
But when you do this, you generally have a pretty, so you do the guitar first, but when you're working on, say, that riff, do you have some semblance of what all the atmosphere surrounding or enshrouding that riff will sound like? Or is there more of like a free form process where you just start messing with stuff and you're like, oh, that sounds good, let's just piece that in, or what have you?
No, it's definitely, I already have the idea when I'm playing a riff or when I'm still writing. I know exactly what it's supposed to feel like, and I know, to me, like, if somebody were to just hear me play the riff itself, they wouldn't necessarily hear or experience the same thing that I am. Okay. So I do have an idea of what I'm going for when I go into it. It is about finding it a lot of times when you're learning more about recording, producing, and messing with synth, stuff like that. So it is a matter of finding that, but it's a feeling that I'm looking for.
And is it the case with Infernal Temples? I know we already touched a bit on, they're not necessarily may not necessarily be a through line of sorts throughout the entire album or the entire EP, but for you personally, what was it like just recording this and getting it out into the ether? Was this a relatively cathartic process? I'm trying to get some sense of what it was like going through this personal recording process of yours, how it may differ from some of your other projects, and how it felt to crystallize some of these feelings you have, or some of these, things you're wrangling with in your own personal life, and kind of channeling it through this medium.
It was definitely a painful process. It's very
Was it?
frustrating trying to record,
I can't even imagine.
especially when you are just kind of doing it by yourself and getting frustrated, of course, and sometimes having to just turn away from the computer screen for a little while just to clear your head and get back into finishing the project.
Right.
It definitely felt very good. A huge relief putting something out there, because, like I was saying earlier, for the first 10 years or so of being a musician, I hadn't released anything.
Okay.
So to finally have something that I completely wrote myself was definitely life-changing. I'm glad it happened, and it felt really good. Like you said, to be able to have it crystallized.
Right.
And to be able to look back on it myself and be able to say, like, hey, I did this.
Right.
It's a great feeling.
And did that help you move forward, in a sense, from some of the feelings you were having at the time of recording, or maybe not at the time of recording, but some of the feelings you were having that are harbored within each of these tracks, like being beyond this now and looking back on it? How do you feel? Because it hasn't even been out for a year. The time to record and such, or being sitting on some of the stuff, it's probably been around a decent bit longer. But on that note, just reflecting and looking back on it.
In one sense, or you could say that it has.
Mm-hmm.
There are, I suppose, a lot of things that I hold on to, as funny as it may sound, for the music, if you will, so that I can at least continue to write about it or get what I need to get done. I definitely use these things as strength or an energy to put into the music, possibly once again.
Right.
In one sense, yes, it does, because I feel and I know that I'm doing what I need to do with these experiences and with my life, I feel, by using it and turning it into these things. Does it change my life necessarily? Maybe in some sense, because I'm finally creating none. I'm finally moving forward with it.
Right.
And that helps a lot.
We could even go into your newest track on Battlefields, just because I wanted to see what that track was all about, or dig into the compositional approach of that, because it even features Bloodcrown, whom I'm not terribly familiar with, but after listening to the track and just seeing how it stacks up to your EP, maybe discussing the recording process of that, or how that one came about and what that track represents for you personally.
So I was going through a huge transitional phase as earlier in this year. It's been kind of a rough year for myself.
Okay.
I was actually sitting with a friend of mine, and we were watching some fantasy type stuff. He's a big anime geek, but I'm not sure if you're familiar with Berserk at all. I'm not the biggest anime guy myself, but
I know of it. That is one of the more classic ones, isn't it? Or it's been around a good while at least. Yeah, I think I've read some of the manga, but it's been ages since.
I believe it started in the late 80s, and then they had the anime in 1997, but it's actually really good. It's a total warlike theme the entire time, involves a lot of demonic entities.
I see.
It's very cool, but we were sitting there watching that, and I was going through a transitional phase, like I was saying. I was basically getting ready to live on my own without, my last significant other, and it was just it was definitely a tough time. And Battlefields is emulating the sense of war itself in this life. It seems like life is sort of a free-for-all.
Sure.
We can have friends, we can have our loved ones, and at the end of the day, it's very questionable if everybody is out for themselves or not.
Right.
And so that sense of free-for-all comes in, and of course, once again, I like to use this term or this image, but the sense of despair, and basically losing everything that you may have at one time dreamed of in the future, or basically watching everything that you once held sacred be destroyed.
Right.
And
Right.
so that's sort of what I was getting at in there. I had wrote the lyrics based around that.
Mhm.
I was definitely trying to emulate that very sense that we're all here just trying to fight for whatever it is that we may be fighting for. People might not even know what it is.
Sure.
I think a lot of people are confused as to what it is they want.
Right.
Of course, everything is subject to change. Maybe I don't even know what it is that I'm after. I think I know, and I know I'm heading in one certain direction. But with none, it's definitely what I find to be purpose and what I was born to do. That I feel like there's something within me, a message, if you will, maybe multiple that I'm trying to convey, that I'm trying to bring out
Sure.
into the world for people to experience, maybe relate to, and
Right.
before I die, at least do something.
Right. That makes plenty of sense. Are there specifics that you could touch on with respect to some of those feelings or some of those ideas, what have you, that you're trying to emanate with the project? Because that is an interesting point when you brought up, say, the project being a purpose or being something you know you want to do or you feel like you have to do this or that you know this is what you want to do. But could you speak to some of the specifics of that, or does it get relatively abstract?
It is somewhat hard to explain
Okay.
in any other context than I may not have already when
Mm-hmm.
I just feel like this is exactly what I'm supposed to do.
Okay.
I don't want to reveal too much about my future work or songs I already have but aren't out yet. But
Okay. That was going to be my next set of questions.
I don't want to reveal too much. But I
No,
mean,
of course.
depending on your questions.
We can allude to it. It's always fun to give people some teaser as to what to expect later on. So,
There's one song that will come out in the future called Dusk Skies Over the Dreaming Forests. And that's, to me, that's the number one. And possibly I feel like I may never top it.
really? Wow.
Even though it was actually the very first song that I wrote for None a
Oh,
couple
wow.
years ago.
Interesting.
Maybe about 4 years ago now, when
Oh,
I
wow.
first started the project with my friend. To me, that one speaks of my entire life itself, or describes that very purpose of
Hmm.
trying to become something bigger than myself, or trying to create something that's even bigger than myself, which is, in a sense, foolish, and it's something that cannot be achieved. I'm after something that's impossible, and I know it
Hmm.
is. And ultimately, and that could feed a lot into that sense of despair, is I know that failure is inevitable because
Hmm.
I'm trying to become God, if you will. It's just, for lack of the better word, or
Right,
to put it
right.
in one sense,
Sure.
I want to create something that's going to outlast me, that can really get under people's skin, maybe
Sure.
change their life. Like certain artists and music has changed mine forever.
Right.
That's definitely one thing that feeds into that sense of despair.
Huh. How does that. It is interesting, though, to hear your note about the one track that has yet to come out, but you think, at least at this moment, it would be difficult for yourself to top it. Is there a reason for that? Or I know we won't be able to play a sample of that. It may not even be recorded, but I'm curious, too, about what makes you feel that that track is something that is already beyond, in a sense. Does it maybe have to do with you wrote the composition at such a early, quote unquote, lack for a better term, like, I don't want to say innocence, but it's like, that's the rawest at its, you wrote the track when it was fresh and raw, the project itself. But I'm trying to get at what reason or what you think leads you to believe it'd be difficult to top.
It's maybe not compositionally,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe other people won't, like, let's say fans of my music, they might not consider it their favorite song, but for me,
Sure.
I made it because when the project first started, sorry, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. When it
Yeah, no
first started, it
worries.
was completely instrumental, when it was the duo.
Mm-hmm.
And later on, when it was just me, I rewrote the song, or at least part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I rewrote the leads to it, and then I added the lyrics.
Mm-hmm.
And I decided to make that my anthem, if you will, like
I see.
the one that says it all,
I
that
see.
says who I am, talks about this abstract purpose, if you will, that I keep
Right.
talking about.
Yeah, sure.
It's the one that really dives into it, and to me, it will always be that one, the one that's closest to my heart, that's deepest to me.
Hmm.
I mean, they all are. They're all
Right.
a part of me. So
Right.
I'll always feel that way, but that's lyrically, that's the one that says it all, I think.
Interesting. Okay, and is that something that is there plans for that to be released, say, on the next EP or the next LP, what have you, or is that going to come even later on, or will that never even see the light of day per se?
Yeah, the song that never premieres.
Yes.
It's gonna be on the full length album. There's
Okay.
7 tracks in total, and I'm planning on probably releasing it as a single beforehand, and I want to come out with a music video for it as well. I
Hmm.
have some interesting plans, if you will, for that video, but I don't want to spoil too much about that right now.
Of course, I
I've
understand.
already mentioned the song itself.
Right. Yes, that's more than enough, I think, or that's already a pretty good detail by itself. But on that other point too, being able to that feeling of despair and knowing that you're trying to create something larger than yourself, but you know there's some sort of there's an inevitable sense of failure, or you won't be able to attain exactly what you set out in your mind. I mean, is there I'm trying to think of a way to ask, like, producing the tracks, is there a sense of hope within this undercurrent of despair that you feel that one day you will be able to etch out or get as close as you possibly can to this sound or this feeling that is bigger than yourself, or trying to wrangle this in some way? Do you think you could ever get close to that, or is that just kind of is that really just how it is, not being able to achieve, but you'll still do your best by producing tracks and composing and such?
That's pretty much it. I mean, all of us really. I say this for everybody. We can get as close as we can if what we're looking to achieve is high above
Right.
this. We can only get as close as we can. At least people with a similar mission as I,
Mm-hmm.
and that will be where the flag hits the ground. That's where the flag will be planted wherever I get.
Right.
None of us are sure when we're gonna die or
Mm-hmm.
what can happen. For all I know, I might not make it to releasing the album. For all I know, I'll end up being 80 years old. And
Right.
I'll have the
Right.
album. I'm not exactly sure, but it's definitely about never giving up, I guess, to say something hopeful. That's also what Battlefields is about. It's about never surrender, basically. Even against, and it's a lyric that I speak in that song, against the inevitable face of disruption. No matter what comes, you can't stop. It's just another bullet,
Right. And is
and
there
it's the only way.
right? And is there a way you find, like, despite some of the more nihilistic inclinations or some of the things you've spoken about with respect to despair, is there a way you maintain a level of motivation for yourself? Because I would think it'd be relatively difficult to continue forging ahead knowing that this inevitability is on the horizon, but you don't know which day it will come. But how does that affect your compositional approach or your motivation?
I just want to go back a second. That's you just spoke exactly what When the End Will Come is about.
Mm.
The sense that pushing forward, but with the sense of despair or inevitability on the horizon, but I just don't know when it's going to come,
Right.
when these will come.
Right.
So that's what that's about. I just wanted to throw down that note since that was a question earlier
Yes.
about what the EP songs were about.
Of course.
And yes, it does get very difficult a lot of times, but I suppose there's also something keeping me alive. I'm not somebody who, is going to go, just end it all or something.
Right.
I can't do it.
Sure.
There's also that huge sense, that huge feeling where like something is keeping me alive.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I've dubbed this entity None.
Oh, there's an entity.
Well, that's how I see it.
Interesting. Okay, no. That's very interesting to me. I would not have surmised that, but
At least that's how I That's how I see it. I understand that in a realistic sense that none is a character I've only created,
Hmm.
but it's also what's kept me alive. And that's what's keeping me going. I mean, I can't die without at least taking none as far as I can.
That's interesting. And is there? I'm trying to think of the right, because this is even getting a little heady for me because I haven't thought of this stuff before. It's very interesting now that I know none is some sort of a, maybe not a physical embodiment, but at least you're giving it a name of sorts. Does that help wrangle with the idea of it, or does that help you in some way channel that energy more succinctly as opposed to just having these feelings? Does giving it a name or some sort of a physical embodiment in space, does that feed into that at all?
Just to try to understand the question. So I'm
Oh yeah,
sorry.
yeah, yeah. No,
I got a
sorry
little
for
lost.
me. If my questions are way too what the fuck, please tell me because I
No,
try
no,
to
it's not
not.
at all. I think I'm actually glad where all this conversation is going. It's a good feeling actually. It's almost enlightening talking about all these things. I'm glad we are, but I was getting a little bit lost myself trying to listen to the question while
Yes,
thinking about what we were just talking about.
of course.
So I'm sorry. Could you repeat it one more time for me?
Yeah, I was trying to think of the correct way to ask this with the physical, or giving this feeling a sort of, you're giving it some, you're kind of crystallizing it, or you're putting it into as opposed to it maybe being just a feeling you have, you're giving it a name, you're kind of putting it in time and space, if in a sense, like you're embodying it, you're saying, okay, there's this thing that I can't, it's an inevitability, but it also keeps me alive. And I was trying to think through, does that help bring your mind some ease putting this entity into a body of sorts, or am I completely missing the point with that note you made? Because I just found that interesting, giving it a name, almost creating it, like creating a deity of it of sorts, if that makes sense.
Well, that's what I'm trying to do. Does it put my mind at ease?
And that could be a really bad question, and
No,
maybe.
it's not a bad question. I'm not really sure if it puts my mind at ease or if it makes it worse.
Mm,
Um, it definitely gives me a sense of responsibility.
sure.
Maybe it's a little bit of both. It helps, but then at times it could also be worse because of that sense of responsibility. That's the only way I could put it.
Okay.
It's definitely definitely makes me feel like I'm responsible for something larger than myself. Like it's not about me anymore.
Right.
It's about none,
Right.
which is something that, like you said, I've embodied it, personified it as almost another being, and maybe it does. I guess it does help me, obviously, because it's keeping me going.
Right, right. And was there a certain moment in time that you can recall when you made this connection, or you made this point, or you decided to be like, okay, this is the name of my project, and this is what it represents, and this is what none is. Was there was this several years ago, pre even the beginning of the project, or did this develop, say, as you were working on the first EP, or?
This developed before the EP, and it definitely developed over time as well. I before I started None. I was for the longest time trying to start my own death metal band where I would be frontmanning. I was on electric guitar and doing vocals, and I had a drummer, and
Mm-hmm.
I was playing with a lot of different people, and it never worked out for whatever reason. Every different reason for everybody.
Right.
And I eventually just got so fed up with it that I finally decided to join an existing band rather than create my own. And
Mm.
that's when I joined Plague Phalanx. And during that time, I ended up just jamming on guitars with a high school friend of mine, and that's what went on to become the acoustic duo
Mm-hmm.
prior to None. At the time, I wanted to call the project Dark Matter.
Hmm.
At the same time I felt it was a little too close to other band names.
Sure, that makes sense.
So I knew that I wanted to come up with a different name, and then about that same time it fell apart between us doing the duo, and some time went on, and I was trying to find a name, and it just came to me.
Okay.
Actually, it's a funny little story. But I was actually at a friend's house, and he was downloading music on from his computer onto my iPod, and you had to name your iPod or whatever, and he was like, "What do you want to name it?" And I was like, None." He's like, "None, okay." It was nothing, and it wasn't
Right.
my name yet. But after a long time, and I was still trying to come up with names, I'm like, "None. This is," and it started growing and sticking to me, and I just felt like it was my name, if you will. Like it came to me in a funny little situation, but and
Right.
it kept growing, and the concept of it has grown ever since. And then especially when I decided to actually take on that name, and then I rewrote some of my older songs, and then continued to write and started writing the lyrics. And then when I wrote "Dusk Skies Over the Dreaming Forest," it was, I guess that's when it all really came together.
See, I would have never figured that out unless I asked you in this that was what the project name was related to. But that's very interesting.
Right. It's also my name, like my stage name. Like I said, I play live session work in some other bands. I would be under the name None.
I see. Okay. Have you done any stuff live with None yet, or has it all been kind of in the background and you're working on that setup?
So regarding playing live it's definitely something that I need to do. I'm not sure if it's really feasible within the next couple months or so, but it's actually possibly my more main focus right now. I would like to have other members up there because I know it would be more appealing, if you will, rather than having a lot of empty space on a stage. But at the same time, that's very difficult to do. And trying to find the right people is also very difficult. I struggled with that for a long time before, like I said, before I joined Plague Phalanx. I was never able to find all the right people. And so I just started joining existing bands before I finally just decided to do this myself. So that's going to be pretty tough. But I am looking to do that at some point, starting in this next year. I'm looking to at least get most of the album finished, possibly before then.
Right.
But playing live is definitely something that I have to do, and I have a lot of ideas regarding stage setup and theatrics as well.
Oh, okay.
I don't want to reveal too much once again,
Of
but
course.
I got a lot of ideas, and I can't wait to be able to pull it off. But once again, that's also something that is really difficult to do when you're doing the whole one-man thing. Because if I am just a one man and I hire other people, then then I have to pay them as well as pay for all like the recording or practice space, et cetera, and that's a lot for one person to try to pump out.
Right.
So it's a matter of figuring out exactly what I'm going to do as far as getting other members and pulling it off live.
Yeah, but you don't think it wouldn't be too appealing to just have you up there with an acoustic guitar and then like a laptop and you just press play and then just do the acoustics over? That wouldn't be very appealing, I can imagine, at least to an audience goer. Right.
Exactly. That's my concern.
Sure.
I would almost rather just do it myself because, well, hey, then I don't have to deal with like what I was just telling you. I don't have to teach people songs and stuff. That would be easy. But I'm just worried about the delivery. I want it to, obviously I want to give people a good show. I want people to understand the same things that we were just talking about in the performance and the visual as well. And if I'm just stuck up there with the guitar in my hands and, a background track playing, then it's going to be kind of tough to pull off.
Yeah. Could you illuminate however small or however much you are willing to with the respect to the theatrics of what you would want to do without maybe giving up too much detail? I am curious. Are there certain ideas you have to do in a live setting to create a more immersive listening experience, if that's what you're going for?
There are a lot of times, I can at least say this, that I don't want to be the guy behind the guitar.
Okay.
At least physically on stage. So there's that. Regarding the theatrics themselves, I don't really want to reveal all that.
Okay, that's fair.
I'm planning on possibly coming out with some shirts pretty soon, possibly some sweatshirts. I'm working on a new logo right now, or a new sigil, if you will, that
Yeah.
represents, I suppose, the devil's luck is what I'm calling it for now.
Okay.
Because, like I was getting into earlier, that I've been through quite hefty situations this year, but somehow I keep coming out completely all right.
Yeah.
And I still believe, once again, it's probably going to start sounding obsessive with this idea, but I once again believe that it's because of none, and that's what I have to do. But anyways, I developed this sigil, and I'm working on coming out with that one right now, as well as the first one. The first one is the one that's on the cover of Infernal Temples.
Now that you brought that up, I wanted to go a bit into that as well and see what meaning there is beneath that, or what we can go into on that.
So I'm developing a new one right now, and I wanted to include the both of them on the shirt design. There's also a new concept I'm working on, and possibly a short story that I may write or just turn into lyrics, or both. The idea that God, or time itself, of course, outlives the universe and all universes that he's created, and once they've all died out, once they've all swallowed themselves, basically time itself goes cold, and that God is basically a demon at this point, or is consumed by himself. The idea that he will never die, he cannot die, and time will always move on. The sense that perhaps God's only wish is to stop, and that the only worthy opponent to God is death itself, because death takes everything that is born within him, everything that he's created. But the idea that death would deny time and time again is a line that I'm working on that I'll probably use on this sweatshirt.
Interesting.
That's just touching the very, super summary about it, but I have a little short story that I've been trying to work on.
Could we go into that a little bit, or is that detail you prefer to leave out for the time being? Because that sounds very intriguing based on how you just described it.
That's probably as much as I wanted to describe.
Okay.
Because the rest I would pretty much just be reading it to you.
Sure. I mean, if we want to have, maybe we could just do it. Maybe we can start a new From Corners Unknown, like an audiobook section or something like that. And you can, I don't know. That sounds very intriguing. Well, without going into too much depth on that, is that short story? Is that just tens of pages? Has that been something you've been working on for a good while too, or is that a side passion, if you could call it that, in addition to the music you produce?
You could call it that. It's definitely my first one. If I go through with it, writing it in that sense, I've only been working on this concept the past few months.
Okay.
But I may just use it as lyrics as well for a new song.
And how did those crop up? Was that a result of some more personal tumult or some life event, or has this been something you've chewed on for a while and are now deciding to put it into words?
That's pretty much it. Of course, I'm personifying time itself, and it came about just in a conversation that I was having with a friend of mine. Somehow I went on about that, and I think I was watching some sort of horror flick, but it also just kind of, like, at the same time as us talking about this, and it just kind of inspired me, and I started going on in my head about it. But the concept itself is supposed to relate to actual human life and what's going on right now.
Interesting. Okay. On the sigils, could you dive into that a little bit as well, or are there more details beyond what you've already discussed? Say the one on the Infernal Temples of the Meditative, and the new one you're working on?
So the one on Infernal Temples I refer to as the Hex, if you will, or it's the entity None itself. It's also it's actually a picture of my own eye, which I wrote with None written forward and backwards, and I consider that to be the one, the curse, if you will.
Interesting.
And I've just basically of None itself, what I was talking about earlier. And then with the new one, I was referring to as the Devil's Luck, because I've gotten a few car accidents, actually a couple this year, but both of them I ended up coming out completely okay.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, because I know those can be extremely fatal, or that could just be
pretty crazy. Actually, the last one happened in the rain too. I got I'm a little more shook up from that one rather than the first one, but either way, I'm completely okay. Nobody was hurt, and it was just a trip. And I'm starting to refer to this one as the Devil's Luck, if just for lack of a better word.
Sure.
It's like there's something protecting me. And
Interesting.
that's what this one's about.
And would you say that some of those close calls, some of those run-ins, has that changed your perspective at all on some of the music you produce or some of the projects you have, at least with respect to the devil's luck, being fortunate in not being injured or killed in that matter? Has that given you more appreciation for,
It's
respect for life, what have you?
Yes, it's definitely made me reevaluate a lot of the choices that I've been making. Has it changed the music? Not necessarily changed, as
Sure.
it's moving forward. It's just continuing. Life keeps happening, and things happen every single day to all of us. So it's just more of a progression.
I see. Are there extraneous influences in addition to, say, other artists? Are there other medias that influence your work, what have you? Be it the art that you have on your EP or Battlefields or just the musical composition? Like, what else feeds into just the whole artistic process for you?
That's a good question. I'm glad we got to that one. So, something I learned from an old mentor of mine, an old bandmate as well. The way he put it is, some are influenced and others are inspired. Being influenced is the idea that someone is influencing you to think a certain way, or to, like, let's say, like in the music aspect, or influencing you to play a certain way or to try to be a certain way. And that's what you want to avoid.
Okay.
So I tend to instead just be inspired, because you should, instead of being influenced by someone else, you should be inspired by what they do because you relate to it. And somewhere else that I heard years ago is that you shouldn't try to copy what your favorite artists sound like, or their image, or play like them, or anything. Right. Instead, you should try to you should try to copy the way that they make you feel, or the way that they make you think. So that's something that I like to express a lot when I'm talking to others, and also in the music. So with None, I definitely try to just emulate certain things that I feel, but of course everybody has their inspirations or their influences, if we want to be literal about it. So my favorite artists, I suppose, Benighted and Sodom is probably the number one, if not up there. I don't know if you're familiar with Matron Thorn at all from Evangelist. He's got a lot of projects.
No, I'm not too familiar, but when you brought up Benighted, you're talking about the French death metal band, is that right?
No, Benighted and Sodom is a one man from
shit.
From America.
I sound like an idiot now. I thought those were two bands concatenated by the and.
Benighted in Sodom.
Okay. See, here we go. I'm gonna have to leave this in so people can laugh at. I thought you were talking about a tech death band, or like a technical death metal band, or death metal band from France. So I'm way off the mark here. But anyway, as you were saying.
Benighted in Sodom is probably one of my top favorite artists. So is Blue Dust Nord, who I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Deathspell Omega for sure. So I like a lot of the French stuff. And then as far as other genres, as far as Neofolk, I love Death in June, but that's a given. I'm also heavy into Rome and Of the Wand and the Moon. I'm not sure if you're familiar with any of those artists.
Not as many. No, it sounds like I have a lot of work to do. But if you want to gush or nerd out over any of them or discuss, because I am interested in maybe if there are some thoughts or some things you can divulge about what about those artists left impressions on you and how those have affected or seeped into your work as None, if you could point to that in any sense.
So Blue Dust Nord was probably my biggest inspiration when I was writing the full-length album that's not out yet, but I imagine you're probably familiar with Blute. But
Yes.
So Memoria Vestusta 2 is my favorite album possibly of all time. Wow. I would say it's arguably like the greatest album of all time. Any genre of music, it's just so beautiful to me from beginning to end, just so perfect. And that one changed my life pretty much. That same old bandmate who I mentioned a little bit ago, he showed me Blue Dust Nord when I was 17. That was probably during the transitional phase. I was already listening to black metal, of course, but that was also a huge transitional phase for me, going from tech death into, I suppose, a little bit more simple music.
Sure.
At least when it comes to the technicality. Of course, Blue Dust Nord is not simple by any means.
Right.
But yeah, that album definitely changed my life. I definitely wanted to capture that same beauty in my own way. Once again, that's probably my biggest inspiration for the full-length album.
I see.
As far as Benighted and Sodom, I actually spoke to the individual briefly once online, and I just basically talked to him about his music and everything, how I actually feel I relate to it more than I've related to any other music. I don't necessarily have a favorite artist because I like so much music, and I do believe that people should take pride in their own work. Rather than, once again, like that whole like inspiration influence thing, like rather than looking up to anybody else, because we're all human in the end. We're very much alike in the end. So there's no reason for me to necessarily look up to people rather than eye to eye. I think it probably makes me sound like I'm full of myself or something, but it's just a philosophy that I have that.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah, so that's on my closest musical inspirations. I've been trying to listen to a lot more like electronic music, like trying to dive back into some of the things I was listening to as a kid. I'm not sure if you're familiar with like The Prodigy.
That sounds familiar, but I can't say any tunes come to mind when that name strikes my ear.
It's all right. That's some like 90s electronica stuff. It's pretty cool. It's darker stuff, of course. What else am I listening to? Regarding Neofolk, I've been listening to some Spanish stuff like Pablo Undestruction. He's a Spanish artist. He's really good. That's probably my newest addiction. That's what I've been listening to.
Interesting. And would you say Blodas Nord, and I know I pronounced that, I completely botched it, but are there other artists in addition to them, or are there other texts? Because you mentioned even writing your own short story or finding a way to work that into lyrics. Are there other mediums that inspire you in a sense outside of just music that feed into None?
I suppose I've always been into a poetic aspect when it comes to writing lyrics. I like it to sound a certain way. I can't say I'm actually too familiar with a whole lot of poets myself.
Okay, sure.
When I was younger, I used to read Bukowski.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I guess I could say he's one of my favorites, but like I also said that I don't know a whole many.
Right.
But I did tend to read a lot of people's lyrics when I was younger. I'm not sure if you're familiar with a Swedish band called Anada.
Oh yeah, they are one of my the under. What was it? Under a Tomb with No Inscription or whatever. Is that the right band?
Yeah, Under a Stone with No Inscription was the third album from them. Yeah.
Yes, I listened to that album. I actually just listened to that last week because I love it so much. I haven't listened to the rest of their discography. I wasn't trying to go on a rant, but I love their technicality and their grooves and everything that they do from what I have heard. So
yeah, when I was younger, before I got into Blodas Nord, but at the same time as Blodas Nord, I was heavy into those guys. Check out The Conductor's Departure, which is their fourth album. It was also their last. I don't know what happened to them. They dropped off. It says they're still active when I looked them up on Metal Archives, but 2006 was the last time they came out with an album. It's been
maybe, I don't know, maybe it'll be a long time coming and something will drop. Yeah, I haven't kept a pulse on them for a while, but
that was actually another band that changed my life as well. I just felt like I related to the music so much, and I used to read a lot of their lyrics. The lyrics are very poetic in a sense as well. Talks about God a lot in an abstract way, I guess, which was a good influence on me lyrically.
And what about some of those artists trying to dig some maybe into how you I know that this, because it's difficult for me to describe things similar, say when an album really strikes you a certain way, really speaks to you. Can you point your finger to specific components of those bands that have inspired you that spoke to you? Like, are there certain things that really resonated with you that you can put out into words, or is it really just a certain feeling that's almost indescribable?
You could say that, but there's also so many different feelings that have been, experienced by listening to these different artists in different times of my life, so it's kind of hard to say.
Sure. When
it comes to writing music and composing it, releasing it, one thing I learned is that the order of every song is very important.
Okay.
From beginning to an end of an album, you want everything to flow perfectly.
Right.
It's something that I think all of these artists have achieved. So I just try to think about it that way. It's not that like every song like actually like connects like nonstop, like one track.
Yeah.
Just it goes from one to the next correctly. you know.
Right.
That's one thing I definitely learned from them. I definitely learned to not rush things, but at the same time, you don't want to wait too long.
And is that because if you wait too long, you may lose with some of the luster or the feeling that you have? It may deteriorate, or you may just grow out of it, or I don't know. Time. Okay.
Yeah, you
Okay.
hit the hammer on the nail. Yeah, you don't want to. I mean, maybe that's also going way back to the beginning of this interview. Maybe that's one thing that keeps me looking back at the past all the time, is because I'm trying to get it all written.
Right.
You know, I don't want to lose it before it's written.
Right. And have you ever had moments where, say, looking back on Infernal Temples, the recording process of that, and looking back on it now, are there certain ways you look back on some of your work and you think you could have, say, improved, or there are certain ways you feel like you could fix, or I don't know, update the tracks to get closer to a feeling you wanted to emanate? Or is that's you at a moment in time and you just progress to the next album and you'll just learn from it better? If that makes sense. I feel
Yeah,
like that's kind of
It does.
self-evident, but I also just am curious if there's anything
I,
beyond
I
it.
think everybody does. Everybody looks at their work, no matter who they are, whatever kind of art form they take, or even if it's not even art in someone's work. I'm sure everybody does look back in it and think, "Hey, I could have done this." But something I was talking about with my bandmate recently,
Mm-hmm.
he was saying he told me, he's like, "Yeah, I feel like that all the time with his music," and he's like, "But you were a different person at that time.
Right.
You do things differently now because you're not that same person that you were when you wrote this, when you recorded this, and when you did it, it was perfect at the time," which was a nice thing for him to tell me.
Right.
These are not my words. I'm not calling myself perfect.
Oh, sure, of course.
But that's what he had to tell me, and I guess that's definitely true. So I don't I don't necessarily feel like I wish I would have changed it or could change it. Rather than maybe I'll come out with another When the End Will Come in the future,
Right.
possibly with vocals,
Sure.
with lyrics. I mean,
And is that on that note specifically, is there at this moment in time, or at least at this during this interview, this little stream of consciousness we're having, what would you say, like, if you were to add lyrics to a song like that? I'm trying to get at, looking back on, say, a track like that, do you think that there is something more to be said that you may have not seen at the time of recording that, if that makes sense? So going back and adding some new elements to it.
so I actually did write the lyrics to When the End Will Come already, and earlier this year I had years worth of recordings on my iPhone, and I had years worth of lyrics, poetry, my thoughts, my dreams that I would write down, and I actually lost it all. My phone broke, and it wasn't backed up on iCloud for the past 2 years or so.
Oh shit.
So I lost everything, including the lyrics to Battlefields, which I ended up having to rewrite.
Oh,
So,
interesting.
but because of that, I lost the lyrics to When the End Will Come as well, which was actually based on a dream I had, which of course would be adding a completely new element to it, but I thought was still able to relate to the original concept of that decay. In fact, it's a reoccurring dream that I have, and I haven't had it actually since I wrote about it, which is kind of a shame. I'm hoping to go back to it at some point, or it will come to me.
Right.
But behind one house, there's always this other house, and it's completely burned down, and it's many stories high. The house belongs to my old bandmate's dad, and there's a very, very long staircase that winds and like turns to get to the front door. And I always go in there, even though like you're not supposed to, because it's completely occupied by different spirits. So the house is completely destroyed on the outside, and then you go up. It takes a while to get in there, and when I get in there, the entire house is well kept. On the inside, it's like perfect. It's very early 1900s-esque, Victorian era. Everything's perfect. And then basically, because there's different stories from different times, different dreams, but I'm always walking around and walking into different rooms. I'm not sure exactly why I keep going in there, because every single time I am, it's like I'm in search of something. I had an encounter with one spirit in one of the rooms because each room is occupied by its own spirit. I had an encounter with one that was in the form of like this life-size porcelain doll, and it locked me in the room with it. And basically, there was like this laughter coming from it, and I smashed it. I broke the whole fucking thing, and then the door ended up unlocking, and then I left, and that was the last one that I had. But there was many of me visiting different rooms and experiencing different entities, and that's what I started writing When the End Will Come About, is this reoccurring dream where it's like I'm in search of something, and I might be looking for my own room there, or I might have always had one. I might already have one. Like maybe I belong here.
Interesting.
So that's the concept behind that.
Wow, that's very interesting. That's way more in depth than I could have ever. Wow, okay. Huh. That's very intriguing. And that's something that you've not. I don't know. It sounds. I mean, going and seeking something. I mean, that sounds like a bit of an unnerving nightmare, or well, maybe not a nightmare, but some sort of a dream of sorts. But you said you do hope to be able to return to that. Do you think that you may be able to find some sort of? Do you think that there is something to find within that dream if you ever do get back into it? Like there is something. Will you have? I don't know. What do you think? Is there something itching or scratching at the back of your skull that tells you know what it is, but you don't want to say it, maybe? Or
I'm not sure what it is. That's how I ended it with the question. Maybe I'm looking for my own room, or I already have one, or maybe I've always been here and this is the world that's within me. I'm not exactly sure, but I do hope to return to it and to learn more about it and write more about it, because ultimately that's kind of what I care about in this world. I need to write about it, especially because I lost it. I especially need to go back now, and I need to write about it, figure it out.
And is it the case that you only have you have some inklings of it, but do you think in a way losing some of the writing, has that set you back at all, or is that almost made you more, has that made you want to persevere more, if that makes sense?
It's both.
Okay.
It's definitely both. It has set me back because I've lost so much. I was able to recover some things that like I kept like as a document online or something,
Right.
including some of the album songs, which I'm really thankful I was able to save that.
Yeah,
Because one
sure.
was pretty long. But regarding that, I'll have to rewrite it, but I'm pretty pissed actually because
Yeah.
I wrote down it all as soon as I woke up. So I'm not going to be able to capture that exactly unless I go back. So it's also definitely a motivating factor to back up all my writing for sure. Write it down in more than one place. Don't just keep it on my phone.
Yes.
Write it down maybe twice, two different notebooks or something.
Yes.
I've definitely learned from it, but it sucks.
Yeah, no, definitely. I couldn't even imagine. I don't even know if something like that catastrophic happened to me. I would probably just scrap it and move on, but that's probably I don't know. That sounds like that'd be very frustrating to have to deal with. But is there on that dream as well? I mean, even though some of the notes and sentiments or a lot of the notes you've lost much of it. I was curious just about some of the detail you mentioned early on, and is there anything you could relate to what it may represent? Or because I found interesting how you say there's the house that has, the house that's burned down, but there's the house behind the other house, but it has the staircase that spirals up. I was just trying to get a sense of what you think that may represent for you, kind of that scorched exterior, but you go inside and it's perfect in how it looks or how it's set up.
I'm not exactly sure, to be honest with you. Okay. I was talking with a friend of mine, and she basically looked it up when I was telling her, when I was reading it to her, actually. She looked it up, and she was saying that people having dreams of these houses, it basically is you within, and that each room represents just another part of you. And that's very vague, and I kind of assumed that already. But I don't know, I guess I'm just kind of rolling with that. But I need to learn more myself.
Sure.
It's also a question if that's where I'm going to be after I die, because I don't really know what happens after we die.
Right. For, say, 2019, what do you have on the horizon that people, that you're excited about and that you want to share with folks? Battlefield is already out on your personal Bandcamp, but for the following year, the year to come, because we're recording this the 31st of December. What have you got on the horizon?
Well, first of all, from Corners Unknown, for sure.
Right.
Thank you, Ryan.
Yes.
That's going to be the first thing to come is this compilation, which I'm really looking forward to being on. Also, I'm familiar with AutoCreator, and I'm looking forward to being on,
Right.
compilation. We're going to release this sometime, you were saying, maybe within the next few weeks, so that's pretty exciting. I have another interview. Rather than a podcast, I have one coming up with a webzine called Cult Cat Magazine. It's run by a young woman named Irina, who's from here, from Bay Area.
Okay.
She offered me to actually do a written one, so she's going to send me a questionnaire. So I'm going to be doing that pretty soon here. And then I'm looking forward to continuing to record my full-length album. I actually, I've had to switch around where and who I've been recording with a couple times the past couple years, so it's been pretty frustrating.
Right.
I won't be recording with Devin Stevens this time, not for any bad reason. I just kind of don't want to bother the guy,
Right.
because it's a lot of work. So I think I found who I'm going to be working with, but we'll find out pretty soon here. Mm-hmm. I want to get a music video going for Dusk Skies Over the Dreaming Forest, like I told you.
Yeah, yeah.
This is kind of just recapping on everything we talked about, actually. I want to get
that's true.
This new design finished for t-shirts, maybe sweatshirts. Actually, sweatshirts are probably more ideal, I think, because I want to have something on the back, and I just think it looks great on a sweatshirt.
Sure.
So there's that, and I suppose those are my future plans for None at the very moment, and also figure out what I'm going to do about getting a live setup going. Yeah. Now, regarding my other projects, I play in a black metal band called Awakened Abyss, like I was mentioning earlier. We're looking at recording a new EP pretty soon. It's been a long time, actually. It's been like about 2 years since Awakened Abyss released something, and I wasn't on that. I wasn't part of the group yet, so that's pretty exciting. And then Thangora Drim is also doing very well right now. We're hoping to set up a tour sometime this coming year. We signed with a management company called Extreme Management Group, and then we're looking at getting the full album recorded for that as well pretty soon here. So there's a lot on the horizon that I'm looking at right now, and it's all going very well. I'm really happy about it. It's this year has been one hell of a battlefield, and that's what that whole thing is about, because so many good and prosperous things have happened. I've had people like you get a hold of me and to set something like this up.
Sure.
And you wrote a great review about me. Thank you again.
Oh yeah, no worries.
So I'm really thankful of all that happening at the same time. Like I said, I've been through some crazy shit this year. There's been a lot of good, a lot of bad, and I'm just really thankful to be where I'm at right now.
That makes plenty of sense. And would you, I think we did touch on this, or maybe, are you planning to have that LP out in 2019, or are you going to take your time with that and let it boil and simmer at its own pace, and it'll be ready when it's ready? I'm
definitely shooting for it. I definitely have to let it go at its own pace, but that doesn't mean that I should allow myself to become lazy.
Right.
I shouldn't keep myself from working on it, or I need to keep doing what I need to do to make sure that the ball keeps moving at a constant pace, that it doesn't ever stop. So, I'm definitely looking to have that out by 2019, hopefully by the summer. But I also said that earlier this year, about this year.
Right.
I wanted to have it this year. So who knows? But I've been working on it for quite some time, and it's maybe about halfway there.
Okay. Well, that sounds good, man.
Cool. Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate your time too, man.
End.